The average UK household spends over £400 a year on toilet paper, and most of us choose it in about 10 seconds. Price, row count, maybe where it says soft, strong, recycled, bamboo or tri-ply, but that tells you almost nothing. So I built what might be the most over-engineered toilet roll test ever done, and tested 5 popular brands for strength, comfort, absorbency, value for money, and how well they actually break down in water. I am Antoni. I have spent 14 years running a commercial cleaning company and testing products claims properly as part of the job. Nothing here is sponsored. Every test was repeated 3 times and averaged. And by the end, you will see why the cheapest roll, the strongest roll, and the quick dissolving roll are not always what they seem. Here are the 5 brands we tested. Andrex Classic, Who Gives a Crap, Tiboo Bamboo, Thetford Aqua Soft, and Waitrose Recycled. 5 brands, same tests, same conditions. Let's start with the number everyone thinks matters most. Strength. The Feels Strong test. In plain English, this means how much force the paper can take before it snaps. Each brand was cut to the same width, clamped into the rig, and pulled slowly until it failed. The force gauge recorded the highest number just before the break. Who Gives a Crap and Tiboo came out strongest here, both reaching about 14 newtons. Andrex Classic came in about 12.5 newtons. Thetford Aqua Soft was around 12 newtons. So, dry, the premium bamboo and sugarcane papers look very strong. But here is the problem. Toilet paper does not stay dry, and that is where this test starts to get much more interesting. Quick question before we run the wet test. Which one do you think holds together best when water hits it? Because my guess before testing was wrong. Test 2, wet strength. The real world test. For the wet strength test, we repeated the exact same setup. Same width, same clamps, same pulling speed. But this time we added half a milliliter of water to the center of the paper, waited a few seconds, and then pulled it until it snapped. And this matters because wet strength is much closer to real use. It's one thing to feel strong on the roll, it is another thing entirely to stay together when it's actually being used. This is where Who Gives a Crap really pulled ahead. It reached 8.18 newtons in the wet strength test, which was the strongest result by a clear margin. Tiboo landed around 5.36 newtons. Waitrose Recycled was around 5.74 newtons. Andrex Classic came in about 5.12 newtons. And Thetford Aqua Soft was the lowest in the test at 3.63 newtons. Now, that does not automatically make Thetford bad. It is designed for specialist systems where breakdown matters, so you would expect it to lose strength more easily when wet. But this does show the trade-off very clearly. The strongest paper when wet was Who Gives a Crap. The paper designed to break down more easily was weaker when wet. And this is the tension with toilet paper. You want it to stay together when you use it, then you want it to disappear when you flush it. Those two things pull in opposite directions, and that is why the next test matters. Test 3. Failure tests. Finger poke and tear line. Right, let's talk about the test everybody understands, but nobody really wants to describe in detail. The finger through test. I made a dummy finger probe, stretched each sheet over the same opening and pushed down until the paper failed. Higher number means more resistance, and I think we all quietly understand why that matters. This result surprised me. Waitrose Recycled had the highest puncture resistance at 15.7 newtons. So mechanically it is tough. It is not soft, it is not luxurious, but it is tough. And that matched the next test as well. We also tested the perforation line, which is the tear line between the sheets. You know, when you pull a sheet off and it refuses to tear properly, so the whole row starts following you. That is basically what we were measuring here. Waitrose Recycled again came on the highest with a perforation strength of 10 29 newtons. So Waitrose was the hardest to poke through and the hardest to tear off. Waitrose looks strong here, but later on, that strength becomes part of the story. Test for comfort and absorbency. What it feels like versus what it does. We did this as a blind test. No branding, no packaging, no bias from the raw design, just the paper. Tiboo came out on the top with comfort score 5 out of 5. Who Gives a Crap scored 4 out of 5. Andrex Classic scored 3 out of 5. Thetford Aqua Soft scored 2 out of 5. And Waitrose Recycled scored 1 out of 5. One comment on Waitrose was that it felt more like a hand towel than toilet paper. That sounds harsh, but side by side, you understand what that means. It is coarse, dense and practical, but it is not exactly luxury. Andrex was interesting too. Some people like the familiar softness, but one comment was that the texture felt a bit too much, especially for someone who is neurodivergent or more sensitive to touch. And that is actually a useful point because comfort is not just soft or not soft. Texture matters. Then we tested absorbency. Same amount of measured liquid and we checked how much it could take before saturation. Tiboo and Who Gives a Crap were both at the top, around 3.2 milliliters. Andrex was close, around 3 milliliters. Waitrose was around 2.5 milliliters. Thetford was around 2.3. So, softer papers were not just nicer to touch, they also absorbed more. And this is where price starts to get interesting. Because if one paper is softer, stronger and absorbs more, you might end up using less of it. Which means the cheaper pack on the shelf might not be the cheapest in real life. So, let's do the maths properly. Test 5. Value for money. This is the bit most people get wrong. In the shop you see the price of the pack, maybe the price per roll, but rolls are not all the same size. Some are wider, some are longer, some have more usable paper, some look cheap until you actually measure what you are getting. So we calculated the cost per square meter, not per pack, not per roll, per square meter of usable paper. Waitrose Recycled was the cheapest at 20.3 pence per square meter. Andrex Classic came next at 24.1 pence per square meter. Tiboo was 28.6 pence per square meter. Who Gives a Crap was 30.8 pence per square meter. And Thetford Aqua Soft was the most expensive at 38.2 pence per square meter. But there is still one test left, and it might be the most important one because everything so far is about what happens before you flush. Now, we need to see what happens after. Test 6. Breakdown in water. This is the test I was most curious about, especially as someone who dedicated nearly 15 years to running a sustainability first cleaning company. Because toilet paper has to do two opposite jobs. It has to stay together when you use it. Then it has to fall apart when you flush it. Once paper leaves the bowl, it travels through pipework with bends, joints, older sections and lower flow areas where water movement is much weaker than people imagine. It is not being blended, it is not being shredded, and a lot of the time it is just sitting there waiting to break apart. So we used magnetic stirrers to give each paper the same controlled movement in water, then compared how fine the breakdown looked. And I want to be clear here, this is a demonstration test. We are not saying one paper will definitely block your pipes and another never will. We are comparing how they behaved under the same conditions. Andrex Classic broke down very well. It turned the water almost cloudy, like a milky suspension with very fine particles. That was probably the finest visual breakdown in the test, but it was not miles ahead. Tiboo and Who Gives a Crap were very close behind. They broke down cleanly too, just with slightly more visible particles in the water. So I would not say Andrex destroyed the other. It did not. I would say Andrex, Tiboo and Who Gives a Crap all broke down well in this test. Thetford Aqua Soft is where it gets interesting. It did break down, I want to be clear about that. It did not sit there as a full sheet, but compared side by side, you could still see more small pieces floating in the water than with Andrex, Tiboo or Who Gives a Crap. So it is not that it failed, it just did not break down as finely in our test as expected from a product marketed around quick breakdown. And that surprised me. Waitrose Recycled produced the largest and most visible clumps. Again, that does not make it bad paper, it means the way it broke apart was more pronounced than everything else. And that makes sense when you connect it back to the earlier tests. Waitrose was tough, it resisted puncture, it resisted tearing, but it also held together more visibly in water. This is the trade-off. If you have a modern plumbing and use a sensible amount, that might never be an issue. But if you have older plumbing, low-flow toilet, a septic system, or people in the house who use half the road at a time, this is the one I would be more cautious with. And this is why this test matters. It does not just tell you which paper is strongest, it shows you the compromise each brand is making. The final verdict. What should you actually buy? So, where does this leave us? If you want the strongest all-round performer, Who Gives a Crap did very well. It had best wet strength, strong dry strength, good comfort, strong absorbency, and it still broke down well in water. If you care most about comfort and absorbency, Tiboo was the standout. It had the highest comfort score, excellent absorbency, strong dry performance, and a good breakdown result. If you want a familiar supermarket option that broke down very well, Andrex Classic is solid. If you want the lowest cost per square meter, Waitrose Recycled wins on price. It is tough and cheap, but it is also coarse, less comfortable, and produced the most visible clumps in the water test. So that is the one I would be more cautious with, especially in older or lower flow plumbing. And Thetford Aqua Soft was the awkward result. It was the most expensive per square meter, and in this comparison, it did not win on comfort, absorbency, wet strength, or breakdown fineness. But here is the important disclaimer. Specialist papers like Thetford Aqua Soft are designed for specific systems, including chemical toilets, caravans, camping toilets, and some septic environments. So if your manufacturer recommends a specialist paper, do not switch because of this video. Follow the guidance for your system. The test compares products under the same conditions. It does not replace professional plumbing advice or manufacturer's instructions. I am Antoni from EcoDrift. Thanks for watching.